So, in my last video, I kind of really wanted to mention this, but ended up not because it was too off topic. So, it's now an entire video on its own. So, Professor Xavier, right? Charles Xavier. Charlie Boy. The rare disabled superhero whose superpower is entirely unrelated to his disability. I like him, actually. Well, most of his incarnations anyway. In regards to the ones I dislike, very notably there was that one time in Days of Future Past where he was so desperate to walk again he was taking a serum that was just royally fucking up his entire life, and it was a mess, basically. Sure, he falls into some tropes, but none of them are actually exclusive to disabled characters, for once. At least not in the portrayals I've seen, because again, the canons are numerous. Anyway, I especially like him in the early X-Men films, probably because I have a weakness for Sir Patrick Stewart, but on the other hand, I would also really have liked it if they managed to cast an actually disabled actor for the role, which is an entirely different topic, so I'll leave that one there and get to the main issue I would like to discuss. The X-Mansion isn't accessible. It's the title of this video and likely showed up in the title card, but I need to say it again. The X-Mansion is inaccessible. This guy's house, his house, the place where he lives, is, most of the times and mostly, inaccessible. I think I've seen one incarnation of it where the lower levels had a ramp. Now, is it impossible for a wheelchair user to live in an inaccessible home? No, I'm a wheelchair user and my home is horrible accessibility-wise. We're talking curving staircases with no lifts, weird layout on the ground floor, steep hill up to the yard, the works. But I'm also not fucking loaded. Nor do I run a school out of my inaccessible home. See, it would be one thing if Charles just lived here. Then I could see maybe, given his telekinesis, he'd find it easier to just levitate himself down the stairs, except not really, because that's just expending extra energy on a power that isn't his main strength, when he could just use some of his fortune to have some ramps and lifts installed instead. But, the argument could hypothetically be made. So we could say all of that if it weren't for the fact that Charles Xavier is not just some wealthy eccentric, he is a school principal, at a school he runs out of his own house, a school which is not accessible, which is, a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Because despite the fact that Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters is a private institution, they're still actually required to comply with the ADA because they're a school, which means they're categorized as a place of public accommodations, and as such, they're literally required by law to provide reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities. But that's kind of besides the point, because the point here is, regardless of legal obligation to do so, wouldn't Charles want to make his school accessible? He prides himself on inclusion, on creating a safe, welcoming environment for the children he takes under his wing, and even discounting that, it's his home. He has to live here. I cannot possibly fathom why, then, he wouldn't go out of his way to make it at least wheelchair accessible, if nothing else. But it's not. It's just an old fancy building with some extra high-tech stuff in the basement. And sure, once you get inside the building, it kind of has an elevator, but that one usually goes down to the secret superhero base under the school. Usually. Again, depends on the canon here, kind of a coin flip. I can really only attribute this to abled artists and writers. Abled artists and writers getting handed a disabled character and going, alright, and then not thinking about it at all. Not stopping to consider how this character would actually navigate the world, taking into account his disability. Doing no research, giving it no more thought than just, we're gonna need a prop wheelchair, or I'm gonna have to draw a wheelchair. So what would I do if I were handed Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters and told to design it? Well, firstly, I would give it some fucking wheelchair ramps. Like, that's the very first thing I'd do. proper ramps, elevators in the building itself, at least one on each side of the building because it's pretty fucking big. Secondly, any gravel on the property, that's gotta go. Get it out of here, no one wants that. And I'd prefer to also get all the rugs out of the building, but that might get very sensorially unpleasant depending on how much echo they're absorbing. So they can stay, but only in select places, and only if they've got one of those adhesive mats underneath to keep them from gliding all over the place. Obviously, all the bathrooms, dorm rooms, common areas, and classrooms have to be wheelchair accessible, as do the training halls and the grounds themselves. Redo the entire kitchen to make it possible for a wheelchair user to cook in it. I think, given how rich Xavier is, we could even get some automated doors in here. Take the building to a place where, to start with, it looks like the functional home of a full-time wheelchair user, basically. Then we can talk about building it out into a school. First thing here, signage. Proper, clear signage. Names on doors, classroom numbers, signs on the toilets, that kind of thing. Again, it's a big building. Sure, the kids are going to learn where everything is eventually, but given the givens, there's about a 75% chance they're gonna be at least mildly traumatized when they get there, so why not give them this one thing to make their lives a little bit easier? Along with the signage, of course, is Braille to go with all those signs, and a Braille label maker on hand to label everything in areas like the kitchen. Also, ready access to Braille and audio versions of all study materials and every book in the library. I'd also consider adding dedicated quiet rooms. Sure, you could make the argument that kids could go to their own rooms, but having a dedicated quiet room would be worth it regardless, I feel. Also, just have a sign language interpreter. Not necessarily on staff if no one actually living in the house needs one, but on call at least. And all teaching material in the form of videos obviously is going to need closed captioning. Is it a sure thing they'll need any of these things immediately, or even for years at a time? No. Will whatever student eventually does need them be happy and relieved they have them there from the jump instead of having to ask to be accommodated? Yes. This school is, in most canons, utterly unique. There is no other like it, no other alternative for a disabled mutant to turn to, save for usually villains who'll want to use their power for their own gain. Making it as accessible as possible just makes sense. And this is just a preliminary thing, the first few things I could think of from my limited perspective as an autistic part-time wheelchair user with EDS. Another thing I'd definitely do is find a way to make any alarms noticeable, but not likely to send anyone into a meltdown or a seizure, because that's just generally a good idea, you know? But yeah, that's just a very basic groundwork and what I could come up with in like 15 minutes. If I can sit down in one afternoon and think of all of that, I know for damn sure that the actual writers and artists of the many, many iterations of the X-Men can do better. Maybe they have at some point, I don't know, but the most popular iterations haven't, as far as I've seen. And again, my perspective is limited, so if there's anything you think the X-Mansion could benefit from that I didn't mention here, or something I mentioned you think needs tweaking, feel free to sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!